The morning of January 15th, 2026, started like any other Saturday in the small town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania. 12-year-old Lucy Chen had been begging her father for weeks to explore the old Riverside Mill with her. The massive brick building had been abandoned since the 1980s, standing like a ghost at the edge of town, and Lucy was fascinated by it. Her father, David, was a reporter for the local newspaper. He'd been thinking about writing a story on the town's forgotten buildings anyway, so he finally agreed. They packed flashlights, wore their heaviest coats against the bitter cold, and headed out just after breakfast. The mill was even more impressive up close. 4 stories of red brick with rows of broken windows that looked like missing teeth. Vines had taken over the east wall, climbing all the way to the roof. The main entrance was boarded up, but David knew about a side door that maintenance workers sometimes used to check on the building's stability. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of old wood and rust. Their footsteps echoed on the concrete floors. Lucy kept her flashlight moving, taking in everything. There were old machines still bolted to the floor, rusted beyond recognition. Graffiti covered some walls. Pigeons cooed somewhere in the rafters above them. They explored the ground floor first, where the factory equipment had been. David took photos with his phone while Lucy investigated every corner. Then they found the stairs leading up to what used to be the administrative offices on the second floor. The steps creaked under their weight, and David went first to make sure they were safe. The second floor was different from below. There were actual rooms here with doors hanging off hinges. Old filing cabinets lay tipped over, their contents long gone. Someone had stolen the copper pipes from the walls years ago, leaving holes in the plaster. But one room at the end of the hallway caught Lucy's attention. The door was closed, which was unusual. Every other door they'd seen was either open or missing entirely. David pushed the door carefully. It stuck at first, scraping against the warped floor, then gave way. The room inside had probably been a manager's office once. There was a metal desk pushed against one wall, a broken office chair, and shelves with nothing on them. But there, in the center of the room, sat something that made both of them stop in their tracks. A grand piano. Not just any piano, but a beautiful black grand piano that looked completely out of place in the ruined factory. It was covered in a thick layer of dust, and some of the keys had yellowed with age, but the instrument itself looked intact. No graffiti, no obvious damage, just sitting there as if someone had been playing it yesterday and would return tomorrow. Lucy walked toward it slowly, almost in a trance. She'd been taking piano lessons for 3 years and had always dreamed of playing a grand piano. But what was it doing here? Why hadn't anyone taken it? A piano like this had to be worth thousands of dollars. David was thinking the same thing. He moved closer, examining it from all angles. The brand name was still visible under the dust. Steinway & Sons. He knew enough to understand that meant serious money. These weren't the kind of pianos regular people owned. These were the kind you saw in concert halls. Lucy reached out and pressed one of the keys gently. The note that came out was surprisingly clear, though slightly out of tune. She tried another key, then another. Most of them still worked. The sound echoed through the empty building, eerie but beautiful. Her father pulled out his phone and started taking pictures from every angle. This was more than just an interesting detail for his article about abandoned buildings. This was a genuine mystery. How did an expensive piano end up in an abandoned factory? Who put it here? And more importantly, why was it still here after all these years? They spent another hour in that room, examining everything. David noticed that while everything else in the building had been vandalized or stripped for parts, this room seemed almost protected. Even the door had been shut, as if someone wanted to keep the piano safe from casual intruders. There were water stains on the ceiling where the roof had leaked, but they were off to the side. The piano itself seemed to have escaped water damage. Before they left, David took one final set of photos and a short video of Lucy playing a simple melody on the dusty keys. Then they carefully closed the door behind them and headed home. That evening, David couldn't stop thinking about the piano. He did some research online and confirmed what he'd suspected. A Steinway grand piano from what appeared to be the 1940s or 1950s could be worth anywhere from $15,000 to over $100,000, depending on its condition and history. Someone had left a fortune sitting in an abandoned building. He wrote up a quick article for the newspaper's website, including several of his photos, but he also posted the pictures on his personal social media accounts. tagging local history groups and the town's official pages. He wrote a simple caption asking if anyone knew anything about the piano or why it might be in the old mill. He didn't expect much response. Maybe a few likes, perhaps a comment or two from history buffs. Instead, his phone started buzzing within an hour. Then it didn't stop. By morning, his post had been shared over 500 times. Comments were pouring in from current and former residents of Millbrook. The story had been picked up by regional news outlets. People from 3 states away were asking questions and sharing the photos. But the comments were what really caught David's attention. Elderly residents were responding with fragments of memories. One woman, who had to be in her 80s, commented that her mother used to talk about hearing piano music coming from the mill when she walked home from her shift at the diner in the 1950s. Another person said their grandfather had worked at the mill and mentioned that one of the office workers used to play piano during lunch breaks. Several people remembered a woman named Helena, though no one could recall her last name. She'd been some kind of bookkeeper or accountant at the mill, and yes, she'd played piano, but that was decades ago, and she'd passed away long before most of the commenters were even born. The mystery was growing deeper instead of clearer. By Monday morning, the town council had called an emergency meeting. The mayor announced that they were going to secure the building immediately and investigate the piano's origins before deciding what to do with it. Historical societies were reaching out. A museum in Philadelphia wanted to send an expert to examine the instrument. Lucy followed all of this with growing excitement. She'd found the piano, after all. This was her discovery. When her father told her that professional piano movers would be coming to transport the instrument to the community center for restoration and safekeeping, she begged to be there to watch. David agreed. After all, none of this would be happening if his daughter hadn't insisted on exploring that old building. Neither of them had any idea that the real story was still hidden inside the piano itself, waiting to be discovered. A story that would change how the entire town understood its own history. A week had passed since Lucy and her father discovered the piano, and the entire town of Millbrook seemed to be talking about nothing else. The local news had picked up the story, and suddenly their quiet little town was getting attention from places as far away as New York and Boston. On a cloudy Thursday morning, Lucy stood with her father outside the community center, watching as a large moving truck pulled up to the building. Professional piano movers had been hired to transport the instrument from the mill. These weren't ordinary movers. These were specialists who handled instruments worth more than most people's cars. The head of the moving team was a man named Robert Chen. He'd driven all the way from Philadelphia specifically for this job. Lucy watched as he examined the truck's equipment, checking straps and padding with careful attention to detail. He'd been restoring and moving pianos for over 30 years, and it showed in how seriously he took his work. The mayor was there too, along with several council members and what seemed like half the town. Everyone wanted to see the mysterious piano leave the mill. News cameras had set up on the sidewalk. It felt more like a special event than a simple furniture move. Robert and his team drove to the mill first, with a crowd of vehicles following behind like a parade. Lucy and David rode with the mayor in her car. The whole thing felt surreal to Lucy. A week ago, she'd just been a kid who liked exploring old buildings. Now she was at the center of the biggest news story their town had seen in years. Inside the mill, Robert approached the piano with the same careful attention he'd shown to his equipment. He walked around it slowly, running his fingers along the edges, checking the legs, examining every detail. His team waited patiently, ready to move when he gave the word, but Robert wasn't in a hurry. He knelt down and looked underneath the piano, using a flashlight to see better in the dim room. He stood up, walked to the keyboard, and gently pressed a few keys. Each note rang out in the empty space, clear and haunting. Then he did something that surprised everyone. He held up his hand and said they needed to wait. The mayor stepped forward, concerned. "Is something wrong? Is it not safe to move?" Robert shook his head. "The piano is fine. Remarkable condition, actually, considering where it's been, but I need to check something first. When I looked underneath, I noticed the weight distribution seems off." Lucy didn't understand what that meant, but her father looked interested. "Off how?" David asked. Robert knelt down again, this time with tools from his bag. A grand piano has a very specific weight balance. The frame, the strings, the soundboard, everything has a place. This one feels heavier in the center than it should be. It's subtle, but after doing this for 3 decades, you develop a sense for these things. He began carefully removing screws from the bottom panel of the piano. His hands moved with practiced confidence, but Lucy could tell he was being extra careful. The crowd pressed closer, everyone wanting to see what he was doing. It took him about 20 minutes to remove the panel completely. When he finally lifted it away and shone his flashlight inside, he went very still. Then he looked up at the mayor with an expression Lucy couldn't quite read. "You're going to want to see this," he said quietly. The mayor knelt beside him, and Lucy heard her gasp. David moved closer with his camera, and Robert didn't stop him from taking pictures. Inside the piano, built into the frame itself, was a compartment that clearly hadn't been part of the original design. Someone had created a hidden space within the instrument, and it was filled with something. Robert reached in carefully and pulled out a leather portfolio, the kind lawyers or business people used to carry important documents. It was old, the leather worn and darkened with age, but it had been protected inside the piano all these years. The zipper still worked, though it took some effort to open. Inside were papers, lots of them. Documents, letters, photographs, all carefully preserved. Robert laid the portfolio on top of the piano and stepped back, as if he understood this was beyond his responsibility now. This wasn't about moving a piano anymore. This was something else entirely. The mayor reached for the first document with shaking hands. It was a letter, handwritten in neat script, dated August 1943. She read the first few lines silently, then looked up at the crowd with wide eyes. "This is from someone named Helena Kowalski. She's writing about helping families who came to America during the war." More documents came out of the portfolio, immigration papers with stamps from the 1940s and 1950s, photographs of people Lucy didn't recognize, some in formal dress, others in simple work clothes. More letters, some in English, others in what looked like Polish or maybe German, and notebooks, small ones with lined paper filled with handwriting and what appeared to be musical notations. David was taking pictures of everything, his journalist instincts in full gear. But even he seemed overwhelmed by what they were seeing. This wasn't just old papers. This was history, real and personal and hidden away for decades. One of the council members, an older woman named Grace Mitchell, suddenly spoke up. "Helena Kowalski. I know that name. My mother used to talk about her. She worked here at the mill, back in the 40s and 50s. Did bookkeeping or something like that." Everyone turned to look at her. Grace continued, her voice growing more excited. "My mother said Helena was from Poland. Came over during the war. She used to play piano during her breaks. My mother would hear it when she walked past the mill on her way home from work. She said it was the most beautiful music she'd ever heard." The mayor was still looking through the documents, handling each one like it might fall apart in her hands. She found a journal bound in faded cloth and opened it carefully. The pages were filled with neat handwriting, dates, and names. Lots of names. "This appears to be some kind of record," the mayor said slowly. "Names, dates, locations. There are notes here about housing, jobs, sponsorships. It looks like Helena was helping refugees resettle in America." The room had gone completely silent. Even the news cameras had stopped moving. Lucy felt goosebumps on her arms, though the room wasn't cold. They'd expected to find a piano with an interesting history. Instead, they'd found proof of something much bigger. Robert Chen finally spoke again. "In my 30 years of working with pianos, I've found old letters tucked into benches, forgotten sheet music, even money hidden inside for safekeeping. But I've never seen anything like this. Someone went to great effort to create that compartment. It's masterful work, actually. You'd never know it was there unless you were really looking." David lowered his camera. "She hid this deliberately. She built a secret space into her piano and used it to hide these records. The question is why? Why go to such lengths?" The mayor gathered up the documents carefully, placing them back in the portfolio. "I think we need to get historians involved, and probably the Historical Society, maybe even the Holocaust Museum in Washington. Whatever Helena Kowalski was doing, it was important enough for her to hide the evidence for over 40 years. Lucy looked at the piano standing there, no longer just a beautiful instrument, but a guardian of secrets. She wondered about Helena, this woman she'd never known, who had worked in this very building and played this very piano. What had her life been like? What had she seen? What had she done that needed to be hidden? As Robert and his team finally began the process of moving the piano, everyone moved more carefully than before. This wasn't just an expensive antique anymore. This was a piece of history that had witnessed something important, something that people had gone to great lengths to preserve. The piano was loaded onto the truck with extreme care, every movement calculated and gentle. As it rolled away from the mill for the first time in decades, Lucy couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning. They'd found the piano and discovered its secret, but the real story, the one hidden in those documents and journals, was still waiting to be told. The documents from the piano sat in the mayor's office for 2 days while experts were contacted. Historians from 3 different universities wanted to examine them. The State Historical Society sent a preservation specialist. Even the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington reached out, asking to be kept informed. But it was Lucy's father, David, who made the connection that changed everything. While researching Helena Kowalski's name in old newspaper archives, he found a marriage announcement from 1946. Helena Kowalski had married a man named Stanisław Kowalski. They'd had one son, Thomas, born in 1948. David spent hours tracing the family tree. Thomas Kowalski had died in 2003, but he'd been married to a woman named Dorothy. And Dorothy, according to public records, was still alive. She was 89 years old and living in a nursing home called Sunset Gardens, about 40 miles from Millbrook. The mayor agreed to visit her, and she asked David and Lucy to come along. They made the drive on a Saturday morning, the leather portfolio carefully secured in a protective case in the trunk. Sunset Gardens was a nice facility, with wide windows and flowers planted along the walkway. The staff led them to a sunny common room where Dorothy Kowalski sat in a wheelchair near the window. She was small and thin, with white hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her eyes were sharp and alert, watching them approach with curiosity. The mayor introduced herself and explained why they were there. As she spoke, Dorothy's expression changed from curiosity to something else. Recognition, maybe? Or perhaps fear. Her hands gripped the armrests of her wheelchair tightly. "You found Helena's piano," Dorothy said softly. It wasn't a question, the mayor nodded. "We did. And we found what was hidden inside it." Dorothy closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them again, they were wet with tears. "I promised Thomas I would never tell anyone. He made me promise right before he died. He said it was what his mother wanted, that the past should stay buried." Lucy felt her father shift beside her. This was clearly difficult for the elderly woman, and Lucy almost wanted to leave to let Dorothy keep her promise. But David spoke gently. "Mrs. Kowalski, we're not here to cause trouble or dredge up painful memories, but we found records of many people, families, names and stories that might help others understand their own histories. We thought you might want to know that Helena's secret is out and maybe it's time for the whole story to be told." Dorothy was quiet for a long time. She looked out the window at the garden, her fingers trembling slightly. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Helena and Stanisław came to America in 1943. They were refugees themselves, escaping from Poland during the war. But they weren't running just to save themselves. They were running because they knew too much, and if the wrong people caught them, many others would die." She paused, gathering strength to continue. The mayor pulled up a chair and sat down, signaling that they had all the time Dorothy needed. Stanisław had worked with the Polish resistance. He helped move people, hide people, get them to safety. Helena was a pianist before the war, quite talented, but she used her musical skills for something else. She encoded information in sheet music, names, locations, safe houses. Anyone looking at her compositions would just see music. But those who knew the code could read the real message. Lucy's eyes widened. It sounded like something from a spy movie, but Dorothy was speaking about real events, real people. When they escaped to America, they brought documents with them. Information about other refugees who would need help, people who were scattered across Europe with nowhere to go. Helena and Stanisław couldn't just abandon them, so they continued their work here, quietly in secret. Dorothy asked for some water, and the mayor poured her a glass from a nearby pitcher. After drinking, Dorothy continued. Helena got a job at the Riverside Mill as a bookkeeper. It was a night shift, which was perfect for what she needed to do. The owner, Mr. Patterson, was a kind man. When Helena asked if she could bring her piano to keep in her office, saying the music helped her think, he agreed. He even helped move it up there himself. Lucy thought about that piano sitting in that office for all those years, playing its double role as both instrument and hiding place. Helena would work her bookkeeping job, but during her breaks, she would meet with people, other refugees, immigrants who needed help with papers, people looking for lost family members. She kept everything documented in that hidden compartment. Every person she helped, every family she reunited, every life she touched. She wrote it all down. But why hide it? David asked. She was doing good work. Helping people. Dorothy's expression darkened, because not everyone saw it that way. This was the 1940s and 50s, remember? There was fear about communists, about foreigners, about people who might not be loyal to America. Helena and Stanisław were helping people from Eastern Europe, some of them from countries that were now behind the Iron Curtain. If the wrong people had found out what they were doing, they could have been arrested, deported, or worse. The room felt heavier with that knowledge. Lucy had learned about the Cold War in school, but it had always seemed like something distant and abstract. Hearing Dorothy talk about it made it real. Stanisław died in 1979. Heart attack, sudden and unexpected. Helena was devastated. For a while, I thought she might give up on everything. But she kept going, kept helping people. She worked at that mill until 1982, when the factory finally closed down. What happened to the piano then? The mayor asked. Dorothy smiled sadly. Helena couldn't bear to move it. That piano held so many memories, so many secrets. She was afraid that if movers handled it, they might discover the compartment. And by then, some of the people she'd helped were in sensitive positions. She worried that if the documents came out, it might hurt them or their families. So she left it there, Lucy said, understanding. She left it there, Dorothy confirmed. Mr. Patterson had passed away by then, and his children wanted nothing to do with the building. Helena asked them if she could leave some personal items in her old office, and they agreed. She went back one last time, locked that door from the inside, and climbed out the window. She told me it felt like closing a chapter of her life. When did she pass away? David asked gently. 1994. She was 82 years old. Thomas and I took care of her at the end. In her final days, she talked about all the people she'd helped. She'd memorized many of their names, their faces. She said she hoped they'd gone on to live good lives, to raise families, to find peace. She made Thomas promise that her secret would stay buried. She didn't want recognition or medals. She just wanted those people to be safe. The mayor opened the protective case and carefully pulled out one of the journals. Mrs. Kowalski. Helena documented over 200 people in these records. 200 families who might not know how they got to America, who helped them, why things worked out when they shouldn't have. These aren't just names. These are stories that people deserve to know. Dorothy stared at the journal for a long moment, then reached out with shaking hands. The mayor placed it gently in her lap. Dorothy opened it and began to read, tears streaming down her face. She had beautiful handwriting, Dorothy whispered. Just like her piano playing. Everything she did was beautiful. After several minutes, Dorothy looked up at them. Thomas made me promise to keep the secret. But Thomas is gone now, and Helena is gone. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's time for the world to know what she did, not for glory, but so those families can understand their own histories, so they can know that someone cared enough to help them, to remember them, to write their names down and keep them safe. She closed the journal carefully and handed it back to the mayor. Tell her story. Tell all of it. Just make sure people understand that she didn't do it for recognition. She did it because it was right, because people needed help and she could give it. As they prepared to leave, Dorothy called out one more thing. That piano. Helena loved that piano more than almost anything. Please take care of it. It kept her secret safe for over 40 years. It deserves to be treated with respect. Lucy promised they would, and she meant it. That piano wasn't just an instrument anymore. It was a monument to courage, compassion, and the quiet heroism of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. News of Dorothy's revelation spread faster than anyone expected. Within days, the story wasn't just local anymore. National news outlets picked it up. The New York Times ran a feature article. NPR did a radio piece. Suddenly, Millbrook was at the center of a conversation about hidden history and forgotten heroes. But the real impact started when historians began carefully going through Helena's documents. Each page revealed names, dates, and locations. Every entry told a piece of someone's story. Professor Rachel Klein from Columbia University led the research team. working with specialists in immigration history and Holocaust studies. What they found was remarkable. Helena hadn't just helped a few people here and there. She'd been part of something much larger. A quiet network of individuals across America who helped refugees rebuild their lives after the war. Her record showed connections to churches, synagogues, businesses, and families in 6 different states. The team decided to try reaching out to the families Helena had documented. They started with the most recent entries from the early 1980s, figuring those people or their children might still be alive. Professor Klein's team sent letters, made phone calls, and posted notices in community centers and religious organizations. The responses started coming in within weeks, and they were overwhelming. The first person to come forward was a man named Benjamin Stein who lived in Brooklyn. He was 78 years old, and when the researchers called him, he broke down crying on the phone. His family had come to America in 1947 when he was just a baby. They'd arrived with nothing, didn't speak English, and had no idea how they would survive. Benjamin's mother had kept a small card her whole life, tucked in her Bible. On it was written a single name, Helena, and a phone number. She'd told Benjamin that a kind woman had helped them find housing, and his father find work, but she'd never known the woman's last name, and the phone number had been disconnected for decades. Now Benjamin finally knew who had helped his family survive those difficult first years. Then came Julia Torres from California. Her grandfather had been helped by Helena in 1951. He'd been a Polish resistance fighter who'd spent time in a displaced persons camp after the war. Helena had connected him with a sponsor who helped him get to America and find work as a mechanic. Julia's grandfather had passed away in 1998, but he talked about the angel with the piano who'd saved his life. The family had always thought it was just a beautiful story, a metaphor maybe. Now they knew it was real. More people came forward. A family in Chicago, a retired teacher in Boston, a doctor in Miami, a woman in Seattle who ran a bakery. Each one had a connection to Helena's work. Some had been children when Helena helped their parents. Others were grandchildren who'd only heard stories. The most powerful response came from a man named Irving Cohen. He was 81 and living in Israel. His daughter saw the story online and contacted the research team on his behalf. Irving had been one of the children Helena helped directly. Professor Klein arranged a video call with Irving, and David was invited to sit in on it. Lucy came too, sitting quietly beside her father as Irving's face appeared on the screen. He was elderly but alert, with kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. Irving told them his story in a voice that occasionally shook with emotion. He'd been 9 years old in 1947, traveling alone on a ship to America. His parents had died in the war. An uncle in New York had agreed to sponsor him, but when Irving arrived, he discovered the uncle had died 2 months earlier. Nobody knew what to do with him. "I was terrified," Irving said, his accent mixing Polish and English in a way that revealed his journey through languages. "I was in a strange country, couldn't speak the language, and had nowhere to go. The people at the immigration office were kind, but they were talking about sending me back to Europe, to a children's home somewhere." His voice cracked, and he paused to compose himself. "Then this woman came, Helena. Someone had called her, I never knew who. She came to the immigration office and spoke to the officials in English, then knelt down and spoke to me in Polish. She had the kindest eyes I'd ever seen." Helena had found Irving a place to stay with a Polish family in New Jersey. She'd checked on him regularly, helped him enroll in school, and made sure he was adjusting to his new life. She'd visited him on his birthday that first year, bringing a small cake and playing Polish songs on the family's piano. "She saved my life," Irving said simply, "not just from dying, but from being lost. She gave me hope when I had none. Because of her, I got to grow up, go to school, become a teacher. I got to have a family of my own. I have 3 children, 8 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. All of them exist because Helena cared enough to help a frightened little boy." Lucy felt tears running down her face. She looked at her father and saw he was crying too. This wasn't just history anymore. This was life, continuing through generations because one woman had decided to help. The stories kept coming. A woman whose grandmother Helena had helped find her sister after years of separation. A man whose father had been taught English by Helena during late-night sessions at the mill. A family who'd received food and clothing when they had nothing. Each story added another piece to the puzzle of Helena's life. Professor Klein's team discovered that Helena's coded musical compositions were real. The notes and rhythms contained information that, when decoded properly, revealed addresses, contact names, and safe locations. It was brilliant and terrifying all at once. If the wrong people had figured it out, everyone in Helena's network could have been in danger, but they never had. Helena had kept her secret perfectly, protecting everyone she helped until the very end. The mayor of Millbrook called another town meeting, this time to discuss what to do with all this information. The community center was packed. Dorothy Kowalski was there too, wheeled in by nursing home staff who'd insisted on bringing her. Local news cameras lined the back wall. The mayor stood at the front, Helena's documents displayed on a table beside her. "We've been contacted by over 60 families so far," she announced. 60 families who now understand part of their history because of what Helena Kowalski documented and what Lucy Chen discovered. And there are more names in these records we haven't identified yet. This isn't just Millbrook's story anymore. This belongs to everyone Helena touched. Someone in the audience raised their hand. It was Grace Mitchell, the council member whose mother had known Helena. "What happens now?" she asked. "What do we do with all this?" Professor Klein stepped forward. "With your permission, we'd like to create a proper archive. These documents need to be preserved professionally. But more than that, we want to create an exhibition, a way to tell Helena's story and the stories of the people she helped. The Holocaust Memorial Museum has offered to help. They want to include Helena in their documentation of rescue efforts during and after the war." Dorothy spoke up from her wheelchair, her voice stronger than it had been at the nursing home. Helena would have been embarrassed by all this attention. She never wanted recognition, but I think she would have been happy knowing that the people she helped, their families, would finally understand what happened, that they'd know someone cared. The room fell silent for a moment. Then Lucy's father stood up. "I think we should do more than just an exhibition," David said. "Helena helped refugees when they needed it most. There are still refugees today, still people who need help. What if we created something in her name? A fund or a program that continues what she started?" The idea caught fire immediately. People started calling out suggestions. The mayor nodded, writing notes. By the end of the meeting, the plans were already forming. An exhibition about Helena's life, a scholarship fund for children of refugees, a partnership with resettlement organizations, ways to turn Helena's quiet heroism into something that would help people for years to come. Lucy sat beside her father, overwhelmed by everything that had grown from that cold January morning when she'd found a dusty piano in an abandoned building. She thought about Helena, working night shifts at the mill, playing piano during her breaks and quietly changing hundreds of lives. Helena had never sought fame or recognition. She'd simply seen people who needed help and decided to act. As the meeting wrapped up, Dorothy asked to see Lucy. The elderly woman took Lucy's hand in her own trembling one and smiled. "Thank you for being curious," she said. "Thank you for wanting to explore that old building. Helena's story could have stayed hidden forever. But you found it, and now all these families know the truth. You gave them a gift." Lucy didn't know what to say. She'd just been a kid who wanted to explore an abandoned building, but somehow that simple curiosity had unlocked something beautiful and important. Dorothy squeezed her hand gently. "Never stop being curious, Lucy. You never know what important things are waiting to be discovered." The months following Dorothy's revelation passed in a blur of activity. The old Riverside Mill underwent an unexpected transformation. What had been a crumbling eyesore became a construction site, then gradually something new. The town council, working with historical preservation groups and private donors, decided to restore part of the building as a memorial and community space. By November 2026, the work was complete. The second floor, where Helena's office had been, was now a small museum dedicated to her story. But the ground floor had been converted into a community center, with rooms for English classes, legal aid services, and family counseling. It was named the Helena Kowalski Welcome Center, and its mission was to help modern refugees and immigrants, just as Helena had done decades earlier. The restored piano sat in a place of honor in what had been Helena's office. Robert Chen had spent months carefully restoring it, and it now gleamed like new. The hidden compartment remained, though it was empty now. The original documents were safely preserved in climate-controlled archives, but photographs of them lined the museum walls, telling Helena's story to anyone who visited. The grand opening was scheduled for November 15th, exactly 10 months after Lucy had first discovered the piano. Invitations had gone out across the country, and the response was overwhelming. Families Helena had helped made travel plans. Historians who'd worked on the project cleared their schedules. Local residents who remembered the old mill prepared to see it transformed. Lucy woke up that morning with butterflies in her stomach. She'd been asked to speak at the ceremony, to tell the story of finding the piano. Public speaking terrified her, but her father had helped her practice, and she'd written her speech carefully, revising it a dozen times. The morning was cold but clear, the kind of autumn day where everything seems sharper and more vivid. Lucy dressed in her best outfit and rode to the mill with her father. By the time they arrived, cars were already filling the parking lot, and people were gathering outside the building. The transformation was stunning. The crumbling brick had been cleaned and repaired. New windows gleamed in the sunlight. A sign out front bore Helena's name and dates with the words, "In service to others," carved beneath. Flowers had been planted along the walkway, bright chrysanthemums in gold and burgundy. Inside, the space was filled with people. Lucy recognized many faces from Millbrook, but there were dozens of strangers too. An elderly man in a suit speaking Polish with his family. A middle-aged woman crying quietly as she looked at the photographs on the wall. Young people, teenagers, and college students who'd come to learn about their family histories. Dorothy Kowalski sat in a wheelchair near the front, surrounded by what Lucy guessed were family members. She looked small and frail, but her eyes were bright as she took in the crowd. When she saw Lucy, she smiled and waved. The ceremony began at 10 o'clock. The mayor spoke first, talking about Millbrook's history and how this building represented both the past and the future. Then Professor Klein presented findings from the research project, explaining how Helena's network had operated and the scope of her impact. But it was Irving Cohen's speech that brought everyone to tears. He'd flown in from Israel specifically for this day, and he stood at the podium with his daughter beside him for support. His voice was strong despite his age. "I am 81 years old," he began. "I have lived a long life, a good life. I became a teacher, as I mentioned before. I taught history for 40 years, telling young people about the past so they could understand the present. But for most of my life, I didn't fully understand my own history. I knew Helena had helped me, but I didn't know the whole story. I didn't know how much danger she put herself in, how many others she helped, how carefully she documented everything to keep us all safe." He paused, looking around the room. "There are people in this room today who exist because Helena Kowalski decided that helping refugees was more important than her own comfort or safety. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren of the people she helped. We are her legacy, all of us, and now this building will continue that legacy, helping new refugees who need the same kindness Helena showed us." When Irving finished, the applause was thunderous. People were standing, crying, embracing each other. Lucy saw her father wiping his eyes with his sleeve. Then it was Lucy's turn. She walked to the podium on shaking legs, her speech clutched in her hands. She looked out at the crowd, saw Dorothy smiling encouragingly at her, and took a deep breath. "My name is Lucy Chen, and I'm 12 years old," she began. 10 months ago, I asked my dad if we could explore this building. I like old places. I like imagining what they used to be like when people worked here and laughed here and lived their lives here. I never expected to find anything important. I just thought it would be interesting." She told the story of that cold January morning, of climbing the stairs and finding the office with the closed door. She described seeing the piano for the first time, how strange and beautiful it had looked in that abandoned room. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, the nervousness fading. "I've learned something these past 10 months, Lucy continued. "Important things are often hidden in plain sight. Helena could have been famous. She could have told everyone what she was doing, gotten recognition and praise. But she chose to work in secret, to protect the people she helped. That piano sat in this building for over 40 years and nobody knew what it was hiding. Not until we looked closer." She paused, looking around the room. "I think there are probably a lot of hidden stories out there. A lot of people who did important things quietly, without anyone knowing. Maybe in your family or your neighborhood or in old buildings like this one. Helena's story got discovered because I was curious. But how many other stories are still waiting? How many other pianos have hidden compartments full of secrets?" Her final words came out strong and clear. Helena taught me that you don't have to be famous or powerful to change the world. You just have to care enough to help when you see someone who needs it. And you have to believe that every person's story matters, even if nobody ever knows your name. Thank you." The applause was warm and genuine. Lucy returned to her seat, her father squeezing her shoulder proudly. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. A professional pianist, a woman named Yuki Tanaka who'd volunteered her time, sat down at Helena's restored piano. The room fell silent. Professor Klein explained that Helena's coded musical compositions had been decoded and arranged into a proper piece of music. This would be the first time anyone had heard them as they were meant to be played. Yuki's hands moved across the keys, and music filled the space. It was beautiful and haunting, with melodies that seemed to echo both sorrow and hope. Lucy closed her eyes and imagined Helena sitting at this same piano 70 years ago, her fingers creating these same notes while she planned how to help another family, how to save another life. The piece lasted about 10 minutes, and when the final note faded away, nobody moved. The silence felt sacred, like the moment after a prayer. Then slowly, people began to stand, applauding not just the performance, but everything it represented. The rest of the day was a celebration. Tours of the museum, conversations between families who'd been helped by Helena, children playing in the new community center spaces, people sharing stories and taking photographs. Food appeared from somewhere, brought by local restaurants and bakeries who wanted to contribute. Dorothy held court in her wheelchair, surrounded by people who wanted to thank her for coming forward with Helena's story. She spoke with each person patiently, sharing memories of her mother-in-law, occasionally laughing at something someone said. As evening approached and the crowd began to thin, Lucy found herself standing alone in Helena's restored office, looking at the piano. The setting sun came through the window, casting golden light across the polished wood. She thought about Helena sitting here during her night shifts, working her regular job while secretly changing the world. Dorothy's voice came from behind her. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Lucy turned to see the elderly woman had been wheeled into the doorway. "It really is," Lucy agreed. "Helena would have been amazed by all this," Dorothy said softly. "All these people, all this attention. She was such a humble woman, but I think she would have loved knowing that her piano would keep helping people, even after she was gone." Lucy walked over and knelt beside Dorothy's wheelchair. "Thank you for telling her story. I know it wasn't easy to break your promise." Dorothy reached out and patted Lucy's cheek gently. "Sometimes keeping a promise means knowing when it's time to let it go. Helena's story needed to be told, and you're the one who made that possible. Never forget that curiosity can be a gift, Lucy. Your curiosity uncovered something precious." As Lucy and her father drove home that night, Lucy looked back at the mill, now lit up with warm lights from inside. It was alive again, serving a purpose, helping people just as Helena had wanted. A building that had been dead and forgotten was now full of hope and possibility. "Dad," Lucy said quietly. "Yes, sweetheart? I want to keep exploring old buildings. There might be more stories like Helena's out there." David smiled. "Then we'll keep exploring together." Lucy pressed her face against the window, watching the mill disappear behind them. Somewhere in that building, Helena's piano stood in its place of honor, its secrets revealed but its purpose continuing. And somewhere Lucy hoped Helena was watching too, pleased that her quiet work had finally been recognized, and more importantly, that it would continue helping people for generations to come. The hidden compartment was empty now, but the piano itself had become something greater, a symbol of compassion, courage, and the quiet heroism of ordinary people who choose to help others, even when nobody is watching. Helena Kowalski's legacy would live on, not just in the documents she'd preserved, but in every person helped by the center that bore her name, and in every child like Lucy who learned that one person really can change the world.